The morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus Chen's empty mansion as he hurried through the front door, his private jet having just landed from New York. The successful tech billionaire had rushed home early from an important business meeting, unable to shake off the strange feeling that had been bothering him since his wife Sarah stopped answering his calls 2 days ago. "Sarah? Emma? Lucas?" His voice echoed through the quiet halls. The sound of his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor was the only response he received. Marcus's heart began to race as he climbed the grand staircase, taking 2 steps at a time. The children's rooms were empty, their beds still made from the morning. In the master bedroom, Sarah's favorite perfume bottle sat on her vanity, but her closet doors stood wide open. Several drawers were pulled out, and many of her clothes were missing. His hands trembling slightly, Marcus pulled out his phone and called their family driver, Michael. "Have you seen Sarah and the kids today?" "No, sir," Michael replied. "Mrs. Chen asked for the week off, said she would be driving herself." Marcus ended the call and immediately went to his home office, where he accessed the mansion's security system. The cameras showed Sarah loading suitcases into her personal car 3 days ago, with Emma, age 3, and little Lucas, just 1 year old, strapped into their car seats. There was no sign of distress. Sarah moved purposefully, checking her phone several times before driving away through the gates. Within an hour, Marcus had his security team searching the area. By evening, he had contacted the police, but they seemed unconcerned after viewing the security footage. "Mr. Chen," the detective said gently, "it appears your wife left voluntarily. Has there been any tension in your marriage recently?" Marcus ran his fingers through his dark hair, feeling frustrated. "No, everything was fine. We were planning our anniversary celebration next month. Sarah was excited about Emma starting preschool." He paced the room, his mind racing. She wouldn't just leave. Something must be wrong. The next few days passed in a blur. Marcus hired the best private investigators money could buy. They discovered that Sarah had withdrawn $50,000 from her personal account the day before she left. Her car was found abandoned at a train station 2 cities away. The security cameras there showed her boarding a train with the children, but the trail went cold after that. Marcus's business partner, David Turner, tried to convince him to return to work. "The company needs you, Marcus. We have that major product launch next week." But Marcus couldn't focus on anything except finding his family. As days turned into weeks, the police investigation stalled. The media began spinning stories about trouble in the Chen marriage, suggesting that Sarah had grown unhappy with their luxurious lifestyle or that there might have been another man. Marcus knew better. He had met Sarah when she was a kindergarten teacher, long before his company hit it big. She had stayed by his side through the struggling startup years, working 2 jobs to help support them while he built his dream. Their last conversation played over and over in his mind. Sarah had seemed distracted, mentioning something about files she found in his home office, but he had been too busy preparing for his New York trip to really listen. Now, sitting alone in their huge house, that moment haunted him. 1 month after their disappearance, Marcus received an envelope with no return address. Inside was Sarah's wedding ring and a short note. "I'm sorry. Please don't look for us. It's better this way." The handwriting was definitely Sarah's, but the words made no sense to him. The police said this confirmed their theory that she had left voluntarily, but Marcus refused to close the case. Every night, he sat in Emma and Lucas's rooms, looking at their family photos and wondering where they were sleeping, if they were safe, why Sarah had felt she needed to run. His company's stock price dropped as rumors spread about his increasing obsession with finding them, but he didn't care. He had all the money in the world, but without his family, none of it meant anything. As the sun set on another empty day in the Chen mansion, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would never stop searching, no matter how long it took. Somewhere out there, his wife and children needed him, and he would find them, even if it took the rest of his life. Sarah Chen's hands shook as she stared at the computer screen in Marcus's home office. The children were finally asleep, and she had come in to leave a surprise anniversary note on her husband's desk. Instead, she found herself frozen in horror at the documents accidentally left open on his laptop. The spreadsheets told a terrible story. Millions of dollars were being stolen from retirement accounts that Marcus's company managed. Poor families who had trusted the company with their life savings were losing everything. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the list of people who had tried to expose the fraud. All of them had either disappeared or died in suspicious accidents. Mrs. Chen, David Turner's voice made her jump. Marcus's business partner stood in the doorway, his friendly smile not quite reaching his eyes. Working late? Sarah quickly closed the laptop. Just leaving a note for Marcus, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He's been so busy lately. David stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. You know, Sarah, loyalty is very important in business. He picked up a family photo from Marcus's desk. It would be terrible if anything happened to this beautiful family. The threat was clear in his voice. Sarah's mind raced to her sleeping children upstairs. I don't know what you're talking about, David. I should check on the kids. Of course, David said smoothly. But remember, Marcus built all this for you. You wouldn't want to ruin everything with misunderstandings about complex business matters. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She knew Marcus was flying to New York the next morning for meetings. While he was in the shower, she carefully copied the fraud evidence onto a small drive and hid it inside her wedding ring box. Her husband seemed distracted when she tried to tell them about the files she'd found, too focused on his upcoming trip. The next day, after Marcus left, David arrived unexpectedly at the mansion. His eyes were cold as he handed Sarah a phone with pictures of Emma playing in the front yard of her press school and Lucas in the park with his nanny. Such precious children, David said quietly. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Sometimes kids just disappear, you know, like those troublesome investors who ask too many questions. Sarah felt sick. What do you want? Take the children and leave. Today, don't tell Marcus anything. Make it look like you left him. David placed an envelope full of cash on the table. Start a new life far away. If you ever contact Marcus or try to expose what you found, well. He showed her more pictures of her children. With trembling hands, Sarah packed quickly, trying to stay calm for Emma and Lucas's sake. She knew Marcus would be devastated, but she had no choice. David's men were watching the house. She could see their cars parked down the street. As she drove away from the mansion, Sarah caught a last glimpse of her perfect life in the rearview mirror. Emma chatted happily in her car seat about their adventure, while Lucas slept peacefully beside her. They had no idea their lives were about to change forever. At the train station, Sarah abandoned her car as David had instructed. Before boarding the train, she stopped at a small shop and bought hair dye and scissors. In the cramped bathroom of their hotel room that night, she cut off her long black hair and dyed what remained a plain brown. Emma watched with wide eyes as her mother transformed herself into a stranger. Are we playing a game, Mommy? Emma asked innocently. Sarah fought back tears as she hugged her daughter. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to play pretend for a while. We'll have a different name, like in your stories. She touched the small drive hidden in her purse, the only evidence of the truth that had destroyed their family. Someday, when it was safe, she would find a way to expose David's crimes. But for now, her children's lives depended on disappearing completely. That night, as her children slept in the unfamiliar hotel bed, Sarah allowed herself one moment of weakness. She clutched Marcus's picture and sobbed silently, mourning the life they had lost and praying that someday he would understand why she had to run. 7 years passed like a blur of cheap motels and borrowed names. Sarah Matthews, no longer Sarah Chen, stood behind the counter of a small diner in Chicago, her feet aching from the 12-hour shift. The once manicured hands that had worn designer rings were now rough from endless dishes and cleaning. Mom, I finished my homework, Emma whispered, sitting at the counter with her worn schoolbooks. At 10 years old, she had grown into a thoughtful girl who understood they needed to keep a low profile. Her long black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, so different from the fancy hairstyles she once wore to private press school. That's great, honey. Just one more hour, then we can go home. Sarah glanced at the clock, worried about Lucas. Their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, watched him after school, but Sarah hated leaving him for so long. The door chimed, and Sarah's heart stopped for a moment. It always stayed when men in business suits entered. But it was just regular customers, not David's people. 7 years, and she still jumped at shadows. Their home was a small one-bedroom apartment above a noisy grocery store. The children shared the bedroom, while Sarah slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. Tonight, like every night, 8-year-old Lucas was already curled up in his bed when they arrived, his second-hand clothes laid out for school tomorrow. Mrs. Rodriguez said Lucas didn't eat much dinner, Emma reported, helping her mother put away the leftover food Sarah always brought home from the diner. These days, they never wasted a crumb. Sarah touched Lucas's forehead as he slept. No fever, but he seemed paler lately. She added medicine to her mental shopping list, then crossed off new shoes for herself. There was never enough money for everything they needed. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah took out her secret box. Inside was the flash drive with evidence of David's crimes, wrapped in the only family photo she had kept. Marcus smiled up at her, frozen in time. He would be different now, she thought. The business magazines she sometimes glimpsed showed him looking older, harder. Emma stirred in her sleep. "Daddy," she mumbled, then rolled over. Sarah's heart ached. Emma still had scattered memories of their old life, but Lucas barely remembered his father at all. The next morning brought a new challenge. "Mom, there's a field trip next week," Lucas said over breakfast. "We're going to the Science Museum. Can I go?" Sarah's stomach tightened. Field trips meant permission slips, background checks for parent chaperones, and money they didn't have. "We'll see, sweetie," she said, knowing she would have to say no. It was too risky. At work, Sarah overheard customers talking about Marcus Chen's latest tech innovation. His company had grown even bigger, but she also heard them mention his obsession with finding his missing family. Some people called him crazy for refusing to believe his wife had simply left him for another man. If only you knew the truth, Sarah thought, carrying plates to her tables. Sometimes she dreamed about finding a way to expose David's crimes, but his threats still haunted her. Last month, she had seen a news story about another whistleblower from Marcus's company dying in a random mugging. That evening, while the children did their homework, Sarah counted their savings hidden in an old coffee can. $312, not nearly enough for the emergency fund they needed. One serious illness or injury would destroy everything she had built. "Mom, look." Lucas showed her his math test, a perfect score. His proud smile was just like Marcus's, and tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "That's wonderful." She hugged him tight, remembering how Marcus had always said their son would be brilliant at numbers like him. As she tucked the children into bed that night, Emma asked the question that broke Sarah's heart every time. "Do you think Dad still looks for us?" "I'm sure he does, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice catching. "Every single day." Later, watching the city lights from their small window, Sarah touched the flash drive hidden in her necklace. 7 years of running, 7 years of watching over her shoulder. But as long as David Turner remained powerful, as long as he could hurt her children, she would keep running. Their safety was worth every sacrifice, every hardship, every lonely night dreaming of the life they had lost. The emergency room's harsh lights made Lucas look even paler than before. Sarah sat beside his hospital bed, holding his small hand while Emma slept uncomfortably in a plastic chair nearby. Her son's fever had spiked dangerously high during the night, and she had no choice but to bring him to the hospital. "Mrs. Matthews?" The doctor entered with a serious expression. "We need to run more tests. Lucas's blood work shows some concerning results." Sarah's heart raced. They had been using fake documents for years, documents that wouldn't stand up to serious investigation. What kind of tests? "We're seeing signs of a serious kidney problem. Has Lucas been unusually tired lately, complaining about pain?" Sarah thought about how her son had been quieter lately, eating less, sometimes holding his side. She had given him over-the-counter pain medicine, unable to risk taking him to a regular doctor. Now guilt crushed her chest as she realized her fear might have made her son seriously ill. The doctor continued, "We'll need your insurance information and family medical history. These tests can be expensive." "We don't have insurance," Sarah whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I can pay cash." But she knew the few $1,000s she had saved wouldn't begin to cover serious medical treatment. Back in Lucas's room, Emma woke up and crawled into her mother's lap, though she was getting too big for it now. "Is Lucas going to be okay, Mom?" Before Sarah could answer, she saw a familiar face on the TV mounted in the corner of the room. It was Marcus, giving a speech at a tech conference. He looked older, with touches of gray in his hair, but his eyes still held the same determination she remembered. "Is that Dad?" Emma asked quietly, staring at the screen. "I remember his voice." Lucas stirred in his sleep, moaning softly. Sarah touched his forehead, still too hot. The doctor had said he needed specialized treatment, maybe even surgery. There was no way she could afford it, and using fake documents for major medical procedures was too risky. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep again, Sarah slipped out of the hospital room and found a quiet corner in the stairwell. She took out her old phone, the one she kept turned off and hidden away, used only for emergencies. Her hands shook as she turned it on. She had memorized Marcus's private number, though she had never dared to use it. As she dialed, she remembered David's threats, the photographs of her children he had used to scare her away. But Lucas was sick, really sick. What kind of mother would she be if she let fear stop her from getting him the help he needed? The phone rang once before she lost her nerve and hung up. No, she couldn't risk it. David's people might be monitoring Marcus's calls. They might track the phone. They might hurt the children. When she returned to the room, a nurse was checking Lucas's temperature. "Mrs. Matthews, he's at 104 degrees now. We need to start treatment soon." Sarah nodded numbly. She had only one option left. Tomorrow, she would have to start begging on the streets. She had seen other mothers doing it, holding signs about sick children. Maybe if she stood near the business district, where people with money walked by. The thought of becoming a beggar, something she had never imagined even in her worst moments, brought fresh tears to her eyes. But as she watched Lucas struggle to breathe, she knew she would do anything to save him. Even if it meant standing on street corners, humbling herself in front of strangers, risking being recognized. "I'm so sorry, my brave boy," she whispered, kissing Lucas's hot forehead. "Mommy will find a way to make you better, I promise." Emma stirred in her chair. "Mom, why are you crying?" Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. "Everything will be okay, sweetheart." Sometimes, she looked at Marcus's face, still on the muted TV screen. Sometimes when things seem darkest, that's when light finds a way to break through. She didn't know it then, but those words would prove prophetic. In less than 24 hours, fate would force her hand in ways she never expected, bringing her face to face with the past she had been running from for 7 long years. The morning sun barely warmed the cold Chicago streets as Sarah stood at the busy intersection, her hands trembling as they held a cardboard sign. "Please help, son needs kidney treatment." Her clothes were deliberately shabby, her hair unwashed. She had learned that looking desperate brought in more money. 3 days of begging had earned her only $200. Lucas remained in the hospital, with Emma staying at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment after school. Every moment away from them terrified Sarah, but she had no choice. The hospital wanted $5,000 just to continue the basic treatment. "Please help," she whispered as people hurried past, avoiding her eyes. Some dropped coins or small bills into her paper cup. Most just walked faster, clutching their expensive coffees and briefcases. The traffic light turned red, and a line of luxury cars stopped at the intersection. Sarah's eyes moved from window to window, silently pleading. A black Mercedes had its window rolled down, the businessman inside reaching for what she hoped would be a generous donation. Time seemed to freeze. Through the car window, Sarah found herself staring into Marcus Chen's eyes. He had aged, new lines around his eyes, gray streaks in his hair, but she would know those eyes anywhere. They had once looked at her with so much love. Now they widened in shock and disbelief. "Sarah?" His voice was barely a whisper. Terror shot through her body. Without thinking, Sarah dropped her cup, coins scattering across the sidewalk as she ran. She heard car doors slamming, Marcus shouting her name, but she didn't look back. Her feet carried her through alleys and side streets, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She ran until she couldn't breathe, finally ducking into a small coffee shop. Through the window, she saw Marcus's security team running past, their black suits standing out among the morning shoppers. Tears streamed down her face as she huddled in a corner booth. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Lucas's fever is worse. Hospital called. Come quick." Sarah's hands shook as she read the message. She had to get to the hospital, but Marcus would be looking for her now. He had resources, connections. He could find them within hours. And if he found them, David would know. David would hurt the children. But Lucas needed help. Real help, not just the money she could beg for on street corners. Making sure no one was watching, Sarah slipped out of the coffee shop and took a confusing route through the city, doubling back several times to make sure she wasn't followed. At the hospital, she almost collapsed with relief when she saw Emma and Mrs. Rodriguez in Lucas's room. "Mom," Emma ran to hug her. "Lucas was asking for you." Sarah rushed to her son's bedside. His face was so pale, his breathing shallow. The machines beat steadily, but the numbers they showed meant nothing to her. A nurse came in to adjust his medication. "Mrs. Matthews?" The nurse looked concerned. "The doctor needs to speak with you about Lucas's test results. It's urgent." In the hallway, the doctor's face was grave. "The infection is spreading. Without proper treatment soon." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah leaned against the wall, her legs weak. She had run from Marcus to protect her children, but now running might cost Lucas his life. 7 years of hiding, of looking over her shoulder, had led to this moment. Through the door's window, she could see Emma holding her brother's hand, singing softly to him like she did when he was a baby. They deserved so much better than this life of fear and poverty. Sarah touched the flash drive that still hung around her neck, containing all the evidence of David's crimes. She had kept it safe for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. Maybe that moment had finally come. As if answering her thoughts, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "I know it's you, Sarah. Please let me help our son. Marcus." Sarah stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. Sometimes the bravest thing a mother could do was stop running and turn to face the storm, even if it meant risking everything. Marcus Chen stood in the hospital hallway, his heart pounding as he watched through the window. Inside the room, his son, so grown now, so pale against the white sheets, lay sleeping. Emma sat next to her brother, looking so much like Sarah at that age that it hurt to see her. Sarah herself stood in the corner of the room, looking smaller than he remembered in her worn clothes. She had agreed to meet him, but only after his promise to come alone. Even then, she kept glancing at the door as if ready to run again. "You can come in," she said softly, though her body remained tense. "Just, please keep your voice down." Lucas finally fell asleep. Marcus entered the room slowly, fighting the urge to rush forward and grab them all in his arms. 7 years of searching, of hoping, of imagining this moment, and now he barely knew what to say. Emma looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Dad," she whispered. There was a flash of recognition in her face. Memories of bedtime stories and piggyback rides not completely forgotten. "Hi, sweetheart," Marcus's voice cracked. "You've grown so beautiful." Sarah touched Emma's shoulder gently. "Honey, could you get some juice from the cafeteria? Take your time." She handed Emma a few crumpled dollars, and the girl left reluctantly, looking back several times. As soon as Emma was gone, Sarah pulled a small flash drive from her necklace. "Before you say anything, you need to see this." Her hands shook as she took out a laptop from her worn backpack. "This is why I left. Why I had to leave." Marcus watched in growing horror as Sarah opened file after file. Financial records, emails, photos, evidence of massive fraud within his company. His trusted partner, David Turner, had been stealing millions, destroying lives. And those who tried to expose him. He threatened to kill them. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Our children, Marcus. He showed me pictures of them at school, at the park. He said they would disappear, just like the others who tried to talk. The investors who died in accidents," Marcus said slowly, pieces falling into place. "The whistleblowers who vanished. All this time, it was David?" Sarah nodded, tears rolling down her face. "He gave me no choice. Take the children and run, or he would hurt them. I couldn't risk their lives by telling you. I couldn't risk you trying to fight him and getting killed too." Marcus sank into a chair, his world spinning. 7 years of wondering, of blame, of searching, and all this time, the monster had been right beside him, attending meetings, acting concerned about his missing family. "The company's even bigger now," Sarah said. "David's more powerful than ever. That's why I kept running. But Lucas," she looked at their son, her face crumpling. "He's so sick, Marcus. I can't protect him from this illness like I protected him from David. I can't run from this." Marcus moved closer, carefully, like approaching a frightened deer. "Sarah, listen to me. I have resources David doesn't know about. Private security teams, contacts in the FBI. We can protect our children and expose him, but you have to trust me." "I always trusted you," Sarah said softly. It was everyone else I feared. Lucas stirred in his sleep, coughing weakly. Both parents turned to look at him, their hearts breaking in the same way. He has your smile, Sarah said. Even now, sick as he is, he smiles just like you. Marcus took out his phone, his fingers flying over the keys. I'm calling my security team first, real ones, not the company ones David might control. Then my private doctor. We'll move Lucas to a secure facility where he can get proper treatment. Sarah caught his arm. David will know as soon as you start helping us. They'll come after all of us. Marcus covered her hand with his, feeling how thin and cold it was. Let him come. This time, we face him together. No more running. No more hiding. It's time to bring that bastard down. Through the window, they saw Emma returning, carefully carrying juice boxes. Their daughter paused, watching her parents standing close together, and a small, hopeful smile crossed her face. The war with David was about to begin, but for the first time in 7 years, the Chen family was whole again, and this time, they would fight together. The private hospital room was like another world compared to where Lucas had been before. Machines beat softly as specialized doctors worked to treat his kidney infection. Marcus hadn't left his son's side for 3 days, making up for 7 years of lost time by memorizing every detail of Lucas's face. Sarah entered with Emma, carrying coffee. She looked different now, cleaned up, wearing new clothes, though still cautious. The FBI agents want to meet again, she said quietly. They've been going through the evidence all night. Marcus nodded, his face grim. The flash drive Sarah had kept all these years had opened a floodgate. FBI agents had swarmed David Turner's office the day before, carrying out boxes of files. The news was everywhere. Tech billionaire's partner accused of massive fraud. Mr. Chen. A nurse appeared at the door. There's a call for you at the nurse's station. They say it's urgent. Marcus squeezed Lucas's hand before stepping out. The moment he picked up the phone, he recognized David's voice. You think you've won? David's usual smooth tone was gone, replaced by barely controlled rage. I made you, Marcus. Everything you have, I helped build. And now you're throwing it all away for what? A woman who abandoned you. You threatened my children. Marcus's voice was ice cold. You stole from innocent people. Did you really think I wouldn't choose my family over money? David laughed, a hollow sound. Family? Look at your company's stock price. It's falling apart. By the time I'm done, you'll have nothing left. No company, no reputation, and maybe no family either. Accidents happen, Marcus. They happen all the time. The line went dead. Marcus rushed back to Lucas's room, where 2 FBI agents were already stationed outside. Inside, Sarah was holding Emma close, her face pale. He called you too? Marcus asked, seeing her expression. Sarah nodded. He knows everything. About the evidence, the FBI. He's desperate now. Which makes him dangerous. Marcus pulled out his phone, calling his head of security. Double the guards. No one gets in without clearance. And get me Detective Williams. We need police protection too. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. More evidence emerged as company employees, no longer afraid, came forward with stories about David's crimes. The FBI found offshore accounts holding millions in stolen money. News cameras camped outside the hospital and Marcus's company headquarters. Late that night, as Emma slept curled up in a hospital chair, Sarah watched Lucas's fever finally breaking. The doctors said he was responding well to treatment. The medicine's expensive, she said softly. We can afford it, Marcus replied, but Sarah shook her head. Your company's losing millions because of what I revealed. The stock price. Marcus took her hand. Listen to me. David was right about one thing. I helped build that company. But he was wrong about what matters. I'd give up every penny to have you and the children safe. Suddenly, shouting erupted in the hallway. Marcus rushed to the door. FBI agents were running past, radios crackling. One stopped to update him. We got him, Mr. Chen. Turner tried to flee the country, but our team intercepted his private jet. He's under arrest. Sarah sank into a chair, 7 years of fear finally leaving her body. It's over? Almost, Marcus said. The trial will take time, but he can't hurt us anymore. Lucas stirred, opening his eyes. Dad, he said weakly, can you tell me the story again? About how you found us? Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, holding his son's small hand. Well, it all started when I saw your brave mom standing on a street corner. Emma woke up and climbed onto the bed too, snuggling close to her brother. Sarah watched her family together, whole again after so long. The world outside was chaotic. Reporters wanting interviews, lawyers preparing cases, financial advisors trying to save what they could of the company. But in this quiet hospital room, none of that mattered. The company will recover, Marcus said, seeing her worried face. Different now, smaller maybe, but honest. No more secrets, no more lies. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, finally allowing herself to feel safe. Just us. Just the truth. Just family, Marcus agreed, holding them all close. The worst was over. The healing could begin. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching through the window as Marcus taught Lucas how to ride a bike. The house was nothing like their old mansion, just a comfortable 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood far from their past life. But the sound of her son's laughter made it feel more like home than the mansion ever had. "Mom, is this right?" Emma called from the dining table where she was doing homework. At 11 now, she had adapted well to her new school, though she still kept her old habits of watching doors and windows. Some fears took time to fade. "Perfect," Sarah said, checking her daughter's math problems. Emma was catching up fast, showing the same sharp mind her father had. These quiet moments of normal family life still felt like precious gifts to Sarah. The front door opened as Lucas ran in, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, did you see? I didn't fall this time." "You're a natural," Marcus followed, his tie loose and sleeves rolled up. He looked younger these days, the heavy weight of the past lifting slowly from his shoulders. The trial had ended last week, with David Turner sentenced to 20 years in prison. The stolen money was being returned to the victims. The Marcus had added his own funds to make sure every family got back everything they had lost. "When's Mrs. Rodriguez coming?" Lucas asked, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. Their old neighbor had become like family, visiting often since they had moved her into a comfortable retirement home near their new house. "For dinner," Sarah answered, smiling at how her son had kept his close connection to the woman who had helped them survive their hardest times. "She's bringing her famous empanadas." Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, no fancy servants, no elaborate meals, just family sharing food and stories. Sarah noticed how different they all were from 7 years ago. Emma was no longer the tiny girl who played with expensive toys, but had grown into a thoughtful young lady who appreciated the simple things in life. Lucas, healthy now after his successful treatment, had none of the spoiled attitude that wealth often bred in children. And Marcus, he had changed the most. After rebuilding his company with a focus on ethics and transparency, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations to spend more time with his family. His new projects focused on helping people who had fallen on hard times, including a foundation that supported families in crisis. "Tell us again about how you found Mom," Lucas asked, as he often did during dinner. It had become his favorite story. Marcus caught Sarah's eye, smiling softly. "Well, I was in my car, heading to another boring meeting, when I saw this brave woman." Standing on the street corner, Emma and Lucas finished together, giggling. Mrs. Rodriguez patted Sarah's hand. "God works in mysterious ways," she said in her gentle accent. "Sometimes the hardest road leads us where we need to be." After dinner, as the children played a board game with Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus and Sarah stood on their small back porch. The garden was nothing like their old manicured grounds, but the wildflowers Sarah had planted brought more joy than perfect roses ever had. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked quietly, watching their children through the window. "About giving up the mansion, the luxury?" Sarah leaned against him, remembering the cold nights in cheap motels, the endless fears, the struggles to feed her children. "None," she said firmly. "We have everything that matters now." Inside, Lucas jumped up cheering. He had won the game. Emma pretended to pout but couldn't hide her smile. Mrs. Rodriguez clapped, her face glowing with grandmotherly pride. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "if you hadn't been so brave that day on the street corner, if you hadn't risked everything by standing there, if you hadn't been in that exact spot at that exact moment," Sarah finished. "Sometimes life gives us second chances. We just have to be brave enough to take them." As the evening stars appeared above their modest home, Sarah thought about all the twists and turns that had led them here. They had lost their fortune but found something far more precious: truth, trust, and the unshakable bonds of family love. Sometimes, she realized, you had to lose everything to find what truly mattered. And what mattered was right here, in this imperfect, beautiful, honest life they had built together.